Welcome to Washington Talk. This is Connie Kim filling in for Jung Cho. The U.S. has made it clear that it'll not lift any sanctions until North Korea gives up its nuclear program in a verifiable manner. The White House also emphasized that it will not rush talks with Pyongyang. Meanwhile, Kim Jong-un has said that North Korea will give the U.S. until the end of the year to change its position. Why is Kim Jong-un not budging on its nuclear program, and what will be Washington's reaction?
Sanctions are on. I don't want it to move fast. It doesn't have to move fast. Right now it's moving along just perfectly.
미국이 올바른 자세를 가지고 우리와 공유할 수 있는 방법론을 찾은 조건에서 제3차 조미순회 회담을 하자고 한다면
In the studio with me today is Mr. Frank Jannuzi, president of the Mansfield Foundation and a former advisor to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Also joining me today, Mr. David Maxwell, senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Mr. Maxwell is a retired U.S. Army Special Forces colonel with command assignments in Korea. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Good morning. So President Trump has brushed aside Chairman Kim Jong-un's year-end timeline for talks. How is the U.S. approach to these talks different from North Korea's?
Well, I think President Trump has said that he is patient. He's not in a hurry. And so I think that he is still on track and desires to negotiate. I think that Kim Jong-un is putting pressure, trying to put pressure on the United States for his failure at the Hanoi summit, because he came away without having sanctions being lifted, which was clearly his goal. So he is looking for a near-term success, but President Trump seems to be patient and allow the bromance to continue.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Mr. Jannuzi? Why do you think Kim Jong-un has put this timeline until the end of the year?
Well, he clearly is hoping to get some sort of economic benefit out of talks with the United States and to get that benefit sooner rather than later. We suspect that North Korea's economy is in the doldrums, but it's really hard to measure exactly how they're performing. But we know that his ambitious targets for growth have not been met. I think that Kim Jong-un and the president are like two people haggling over a real estate deal and arguing about the down payment. Basically, the United States is arguing that North Korea needs to make a very sizable down payment because we don't think they're very creditworthy. And North Korea, for their part, is pleading poverty, wanting the United States to provide sanctions relief and diplomatic benefits in exchange for just a very modest down payment on denuclearization. And it remains to be seen whether the two sides can square those differences.
Mm-hmm. And I think that Kim has, in a way, reverted to the time-old playbook of the Kim family regime, increasing tensions and sometimes provocations in order to gain political and economic concessions. And when you look at the recent test, the air activity, the rehabilitation of Sohae, the train movement at Yongbyon, all of these are could be designed to ratchet up tensions and pressure and really put pressure on the United States to give Kim what he wants. But all of them are really below the threshold of a response. And of course, the other benefit they have to him is that he is able to show strength to his own elite leadership and to the Korean people in the North, that he is strong, he's doing something. Again, this is in response to the failed Hanoi summit.
You're right. So North Korea is ratcheting up pressure against the U.S., but it's clear that both sides want to talk. So if this impasse between the U.S. and North Korea continues, which side do you think has more to lose here?
Well, I'm not sure whether time is on anyone's side. For the Trump administration, they really have touted their North Korean diplomacy as a success on the world stage. And the longer they're unable to demonstrate concrete progress, the more that success begins to look illusory. So I think Trump is feeling the pressure of 2020, and he would love to be able to proclaim to the American people real concrete progress. for Kim Jong-un, time is not really on his side either. He does need economic relief from sanctions. But I think we have to accept that during this period of waiting, North Korea is still proceeding to produce more fissile material. And although they're not testing nuclear weapons or testing long-range missiles, that doesn't mean that all progress on their WMD programs has stopped. And so he will make use of this time to strengthen his overall nuclear arsenal.
Right, but if we look at North Korea's internal situation right now, they're suffering from major food shortages and they're also having difficulties completing its major economic construction projects. How do you think North Korea's new strategy of pursuing self-reliance is going to help them enable to make U.S. sanctions ineffective?
Well, my reading of this re-emphasis of self-reliance to me was basically an admission of difficulty by the North Korean leadership. You know, the economic reform path is the one that offers them ultimately the best opportunity to grow the economy in a sustainable way. But all of that is contingent on foreign investment, sanctions relief, capital, credit, and they don't have any of that right now. So basically, I think Kim Jong-un is signaling to his own people, we're going to resort to our tried and true Juche self-reliance, belt-tightening methodology here, and try to muddle along until the international environment improves. And I was, frankly, a little bit surprised by North Korea's retreat from the path of opening and reform, which seemed to be where Kim Jong-un was headed in his New Year's address last year.
Mm-hmm. And very recently, North Korea has demanded that Secretary Pompeo be removed from the denuclearization process. Now, do you think this is part of North Korea's larger strategy of pulling back from its previous promises to denuclearize?
Well, Secretary Pompeo has said multiple times that Kim has told him face to face that he is willing to denuclearize. He said he's committed to denuclearization, and he'd like it to happen sooner rather than later. But again, I think that he is trying to remove the people that he perceives as hardliners, as opposition to an agreement that Trump might reach with him. I also think it's a way to blame someone. And so he can blame Pompeo for the failure at Hanoi, not Trump, because he has refrained from directly criticizing Trump. And I think that's also part of his internal messaging as well. His relationship with Trump is good. It's Trump's advisors that have sabotaged it, and that's why he's seeking to separate them.
And just to briefly follow up, I mean, I don't think at the end of the day that North Korea can dictate to the U.S. who we send as a negotiator, and so I think Pompeo is going to stay on the job. But I think what we know about Trump as president is that he often has some of his worst instincts be reined in by his team. And in this case, North Korea was frustrated that Trump's instinct, which may have been to cut a deal in Hanoi, was reined in by Pompeo and Bolton. And so I think they are trying, as David says, to basically encourage Trump to disregard the advice of his team and go with his gut instincts and make a deal.
And to emphasize Frank's point, I think Kim miscalculated because by attacking Pompeo, I think that Trump will protect him and will not cut him away as Kim Jong-un desires. Had he approached it from a different way, he might have been more successful. And he might have approached it that let's have Special Representative Began be in the lead, as should have happened from the beginning. And Secretary Pompeo is the Secretary of State with global responsibilities. He really doesn't need to be negotiating. It really should be Steve Biegun in the lead. But now that Kim has attacked Pompeo, I think that Pompeo will stay.
And National Security Advisor John Bolton has emphasized the amount of effort that President Trump is making in order to maintain this good relationship with Chairman Kim. How much more patient do you think President Trump will be in waiting for Kim's strategic decision of giving up its nuclear and ballistic missiles program?
Well, again, I think Trump will be very patient pending his election timeline. And as we get closer and closer to 2020, he's going to be more and more eager to lock in some progress. But this is a president who, to put it charitably, has trouble focusing on anything for very long. So his ability to focus on the North Korean issue between now and the end of the year, I think it's going to be episodic. And there will be moments when he engages in a serious way on this issue, but most of his day is spent watching television or worrying about his domestic political situation. He's not obsessing about the North Korean situation.
But if this current impasse between the U.S. and North Korea continues, how do you think the U.S.'s strategy on North Korea will change over time? Do you think it'll get softer, or do you think it'll get more aggressive?
President Trump has told us what his measure of success is. No testing of nuclear weapons and missiles. And as long as that happens, I think Trump is going to have patience.
Yes.
But I think the longer things go on, and if we come to the realization, as the U.S. intelligence community estimated in their report this year, that Kim has no intention of giving up his nuclear weapons, then things change. The Korea community, the Korea watchers on both sides, those who want to engage, those who are hardliners, they both operate from the assumption that they can either co-opt or coerce Kim Jong-un to give up his nuclear weapons. The intelligence community has told us that is not a fact, and that assumption is invalid. And when we realize that and we accept that, then there's going to have to be a new strategy. And that's something that, ironically, Kim has given us really till the end of the year to perhaps come up with a plan B.
So, Frank, you've been with the Senate Foreign Relations for quite some time. How is the Congress viewing future strategies with North Korea? It's definitely placing emphasis on enforcing the current sanctions.
I think that's right, Connie. I think for now the Congress will simply back the administration's sanctions enforcement approach, and they may even hold hearings about those countries like China and Russia that are not adequately enforcing the sanctions. I think that attention may even escalate next week if as rumored, Kim Jong-un might meet with Vladimir Putin. But I think that the Congress and the administration still have many sanctions tools not yet applied.
I just want to briefly touch upon inter-Korean relations. Kim Jong-un has accused South Korean President Moon Jae-in of acting like a meddlesome mediator and facilitator between the United States and North Korea. So how do you assess President Moon's role of insisting to play this mediator role since he took office?
Frankly, we should not forget that North and South are enemies, and as stated in their constitution, and based on the war that has been fought. So, but I think Moon has really tried to reduce tensions, work on reconciliation. I mean, he is focused on being the peace president, and he really wants to do that. But this past week at the Supreme People's Assembly, Kim Jong-un insulted him, and I think he's disregarded him. And the insult, the meddlesome, one who shouldn't butt in or gets in the. I mean, that was. It was roughly translated as mediator, but from what I understand in the Korean language, it was quite insulting and disrespectful to President Moon. President Moon does not seem to have reacted in a negative way because I think he wants to give peace a chance. He wants to give Kim Jong-un a chance to reconcile. But I think we are seeing the true colors of Kim Jong-un.
So President Moon here is in a difficult spot where he wants to hold another inter-Korean summit, but at the same time, the U.S. is not willing to give the green light in terms of resuming the Mount Kumgang tour and the Kaesong complex. So what should President Moon do next in terms of actually making these talks go forward?
Well, it's a great question, Connie, and I think that all that President Moon can do is to try to re-impress upon the North the imperative that they provide that more meaningful down payment on denuclearization that the U.S. expects as a condition to move ahead with any form of sanctions relief. I don't expect that the United States, having walked away in Hanoi, is going to adopt a much softer approach in the coming months. So really, Moon Jae-in's role now is to go back to the North and say, look, if you want to move ahead with this process, you need to show the Americans a more concrete expression of your commitment to denuclearization. And if Moon is able to do that, great. And if he's not, then we'll see at the end of the year whether the U.S. Eventually yields to this North Korean stubbornness, or whether the U.S. tries to rally its allies onto a tougher approach.
So President Moon really has to play that hard role of pushing North Korea to, you have to give up your nuclear weapon.
I think his only way to proceed right now is to foster the best North-South relationship he can, and try to communicate to the North how important it is for the North to put more on the table.
All right, we'll leave it here and move on to our next segment.
Северная Корея предприняла определенные шаги по денуклеаризации, но она, видимо, ждет в ответ каких-то хотя бы сигналов.
The Kremlin has confirmed that Kim Jong-un will be visiting Russia later this month. Russia employs the second largest number of North Koreans and has insisted that the UN eases sanctions. What is North Korea seeking to get from a summit with Russia? So U.S. Special Representative Stephen Biegun has traveled to Russia ahead of the upcoming Russia-North Korea summit. Besides emphasizing the final fully verified denuclearization of North Korea, what do you think the two may have discussed behind the scenes?
Look, we know that the U.S. has evidence of North Korean working with Russian and Chinese merchant vessels to try to evade some of the petroleum sanctions. We suspect that both Russia and China could do more to enforce the UN Security Council resolutions, which, after all, they voted for. So I'm sure that Biegun's message to Moscow was partly, hold the line, we expect you to enforce sanctions. If you don't, we're going to call you on it. But he may also have had another message, which was, please use your influence on North Korea to tell them to come back to the table, to engage in working level talks. So I think that it's really good that the United States bothered to send Biegun to Moscow because we needed to be heard by Vladimir Putin in advance of any summit.
So, like you mentioned, the U.S. has called out Russia in terms of engaging in illicit ship-to-ship transfers with North Korean tankers. How do you assess Russia's implementation of UN sanctions on North Korea?
I think they've been spotty at best. I think they, certainly publicly and certainly, as Frank said, they voted for them. It was obviously unanimous and among the Security Council permanent members. So I think that's a positive. But they host the largest number of Korean workers, which are really a violation of the sanctions. And those workers that are working under slave conditions in Russia, by the UN Security Council resolutions, they're supposed to go home by the end of the year. So that's going to be an indicator of what of how Russia approaches North Korea on this. But I think with Mr. Biegun going to Moscow, it also it's a positive thing, but it also reinforces Putin's stance, as that we went to see him, and so his legitimacy, his respectability is raised, that we went to see him before he meets with Kim Jong-un. I hope that the message that Frank outlines, for Putin to use his good offices to try to influence Kim is taken seriously. But I worry about other things, that Putin does want to be a spoiler. Putin does provide support, not only sanctions, but I worry about sharing military technology. Certainly all of North Korea's weapons are former Soviet or Russian based. And then there's cyber and many different ways that they could collaborate and cooperate, which would not be in our interests.
There have been some media reports, though, that say Russia may not actually play the heels in the U.S.-North Korea talks. So what do you think Russia's stance on denuclearization here is?
I think that, on the one hand, Russia would like to see peace and stability in Northeast Asia, because they know that when there's instability or a threat of war, it basically gives the United States an excuse to bolster its force posture and its involvement in the Far East. On the other hand, I think that the Russians really do enjoy being able to play a spoiler role here. I think that Putin's desire is partly to be relevant on the global stage, and he can be relevant in a positive way or in a negative way when it comes to the denuclearization effort with North Korea. And I'm not sure that his motivation here goes much beyond just remaining relevant in a part of the world where Russian influence is actually quite limited. So we'll see what happens in the summit meeting, whether the message is one where Putin says to the North Koreans, you really ought to get with the program here and proceed with denuclearization, or whether he says to the American audience, we've got a reasonable negotiating partner here in Kim Jong-un, why don't you come back to the table? And I'll be watching very closely to see what the tone of those comments are from Putin.
Well, I think Frank is right. I think I also think, though, that we should remember that North Korea's nuclear program came from Russia. came from the Soviet Union. I mean, dating back to the 1950s. And so there's a long relationship there. I also think, though, that Russia, and frankly China as well, do not view the North's nuclear weapons as a threat in the same way that we do. And so we tend to think that it's a threat and everybody should want North Korea to get rid of nuclear weapons. Again, going along with Frank, North Korea's possession of nuclear weapons is a thorn in our side. And that gives political advantage perhaps to Russia in engaging in Northeast Asia. So I don't think that they're certainly not committed, just as the Chinese are not committed to getting rid of North Korea's nuclear weapons on our behalf.
And if I can add one point to this, I mean, I have less insight, frankly, into Russia's motivations and goals, but I can tell you what I've heard firsthand from Russian experts, which is that they do not believe North Korea will ever denuclearize. So they're moving into this peace and denuclearization process as deep skeptics about whether the North would ever abandon their nuclear weapons. That I've heard directly from Russians.
And that's probably a wise position.
And I want to touch upon Russia's influence on denuclearization compared to when the six-party talks were underway. How much influence do you think Russia's role has diminished compared to the past?
Well, remember, Connie, during the six-party talks, Russia chaired the working group that was all about sort of regional economic cooperation and integration. I still think that's where Russia's interests lie. Russia's interested in getting the oil and gas of the Russian Far East to the marketplaces in South Korea and Japan and China. And they're interested in getting development and investment in the Russian Far East. So to the extent that the Russians want peace and stability and even denuclearization as a long-term goal, it's all about economic opportunity for Russia. And I think their focus, as David wisely pointed out, their perception of the threat of the North Korean nuclear program is much different from ours.
Right, they do actually want to pursue economic cooperation between Russia and North Korea.
This is a wonderful economic opportunity potentially for Putin. We're bringing Russian oil and gas from the Sakhalin and Russian Far East oil fields by pipeline through North Korea to South Korean markets. There's another opportunity for Russia. So I think Putin, remember, Putin's one of the world's richest men. He's a multi-billionaire. And he's focused on the oligarchy and the profits of the Russian state.
We'll have to see whether any economic cooperation will come out from the summit. We'll wrap up our segment here and move on to looking at our photo of the week. This week, we have a picture of recently elected members of North Korea's State Affairs Commission. Notably, sitting on Kim Jong-un's right is Choi Ryong-hae, who became the first vice chairman of the commission, replacing Kim Young-nam, the symbolic head of state. Vice Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee has also been promoted to the DPRK's top decision-making body. Any thoughts on this photo?
Well, what an elegant room. I think it's important to understand both Che's election to their new position, or appointments to their new position, illustrates the importance of the organization and guidance department to which they're connected to. And I think that is very important. The other thing is that we see four generals in uniform, and I don't think that military first politics, Songun, has ever gone away, and so we need to keep that in mind, that the military is still critical to Kim's survival, and they are standing in overwatch of the rest of the civilians here. So,
and I see, apart from the ethnicity of the membership, I see a parallel to the Trump cabinet: over-reliance on the military, very few women, and a lot of people who look the same. So Madam Choi Song-hui stands out here as the one woman, 54 years old, as a part of this assemblage of old Korean men advising the young, still somewhat inexperienced leader.
And she is a U.S. expert. Her whole career has been focused on the United States, so I think that's telling as well.
To me, it was surprising because there were some speculations that those who were responsible for the failure of the Hanoi summit were going to face trouble, but apparently they survived. Thank you, Mr. Jannuzi and Mr. Maxwell, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all for today's Washington Talk, and from all of us here at Voice of America, thank you for watching. This has been Connie Kim.